Right, so we are continuing our notes on listening and perception. This is part 4 of the notes. If you have your notebooks, get them ready. If you have your ears, get them ready. You should have your ears ready anyway. But you know that we've covered listening and perception in a couple of instances. We know that perception is how we view the world around us, and we take in the world around us through our 5 senses. So because of everything that we have seen, heard, tasted, touched, or smelled, we have been able to kind of figure out how the world works around us. And as we continue to move through life, we will find more about that. But today I really want to focus on listening, and especially the different types of listening. We're also going to get into nonverbal communication, which, as we are going to establish, is anything that is not using a language. All right, so we have the listening motivations. So first, there are 5. How many? 5 different reasons why we listen. The first one is discriminate listening. So for this one, I want you guys to imagine that it's a dark and stormy night. And here in the dark and stormy night, you hear a bunch of random sounds. And you don't really know what those sounds are because it's dark and you're scared, right? So what you have to do is you have to listen for certain ones. Well, that was a bird. That was a tree hitting my wall. And that's Mr. Smith's breakfast taco. Aha! But either way, you're listening to kind of sort out sounds. So that's what discriminate listening is. So maybe you're like listening for something very specifically. You're trying to sort out what's happening. Maybe if you have a bunch of people talking at you at the same time, you're trying to figure out what each of them are saying. So that way you can figure out what's going on. That's discriminate listening because you're sorting those sounds out. Next is appreciative listening. This is listening for fun or joy. So when you listen to music for fun, when we listened to Michael Bublé earlier and Scream sang, that was appreciative listening. What we're doing right now is comprehensive listening. That's going to be listening to understand. Where's my little pointer? I feel like that's going to be helpful. Perfect. So what we're doing right now is we are listening to understand. Then the next thing is we have evaluative listening. This is listening to make a decision. So if you're a judge and you're listening to the jury's case or the plaintiff's case or the defendant's case, and you're figuring out how you're going to make a decision, if people are saying you need to do this or you need to do this or you need to do this, and you're listening to all of those things and you're taking it in and then you're making a decision, that is evaluative listening. And then of course we have the most important one personally that I think is going to be empathic listening, which is listening with empathy. So we covered that empathy is understanding that your experience is not the sole experience. And so you have to figure out how to see things from other people's perspective. And you do that by considering their needs and their cultures and their beliefs. Now, we want to try to do this as often as possible, but sometimes we do make decisions that don't have empathy in them. But if your friend is going through it and you really need to understand what's going on, as you listen to them, you're not thinking about it as it would happen to you. You're thinking about it as it would happen to them because you know them because they're your friend. So it's really, really important that we are able to kind of discern and figure out the 5 different types of listening. But again, as a reminder, discriminate listening is listening to sort things out. Appreciative listening is listening for fun. Comprehensive listening is listening to learn or listening to understand. Evaluative listening is listening to make a decision. And then empathic listening is listening with empathy. And I will tell you guys right now that these 5 questions are definitely going to be on the final exam. So if you need to take a screenshot, take a screenshot. I'll give you a chair turn to do that. All right, cool. So these 5 are going to pop up on the final exam. So I just want to make sure we're all on the same page about that. Next, we have verbal versus nonverbal communication. So I think that one thing that a lot of people get caught up in is that, well, Mr. Smith, if I'm writing a letter to someone, that's not verbal communication. But it is. And the reason why is because it is using a language that is spoken. But even though it's not spoken, we're writing it. But Mr. Smith, we're not making any sound. Okay, so there's a difference between verbal and nonverbal and vocal and nonvocal, okay? So verbal communication is any communication using words. It can be oral or written, so it can be spoken or written down. Nonverbal is any communication without words. That would be like smiling, waving, nodding. Vocal is any communication with sound, and nonvocal is anything without sound. And a couple of examples, talking or singing would be verbal and vocal. Nonverbal and vocal would be like sighing or like grunting or laughing. You're making sound, but you're not using any language. So if you're laughing at someone, that is definitely nonverbal communication, but it's still vocal, if that makes sense. Verbal plus non-vocal is going to be words with no sound. That would be texting or writing, or traffic signs. That is still verbal communication. And then we have non-verbal, non-vocal. That's no words and no sound. Traffic sign without words, and also some gestures. So either way, that's kind of how verbal versus nonverbal and vocal versus non-vocal work. Language is arbitrary. That means that we give it a random assignment of meaning. So what I mean by that is, I can say, all right, guys, I'll see you tomorrow, but I'm not specifying when that is. Or like if you say, I'll see you later, we're not like really saying like, oh, I don't know when that's going to be, but like we don't like text each other. All right, I have a great night. Filled with dreams of wonder, and I hope that you sleep really well, and I hope that your circadian rhythm doesn't get thrown off, and I hope that all of this doesn't really Zoom. You can pick up circadian rhythm. That's awesome. Either way, but you're not super specific every time that you talk to someone. So that's what arbitrary means. We assign meaning at random. There's no original one-to-one comparison. Language also changes over time. I'm going to date myself a little bit by proving what an old man I am. But when I was a kid, you didn't say bet to someone to say like yes. You're like, oh, like how much do you want to bet? But it got shortened to yes, absolutely, we can do that. A lot of students just say, all right, hey, I'll see you at the game. All right, bet, easy. But that wasn't something that was said 20 or 30 years ago. Language has changed over time. Next, we have connotative versus denotative. So connotative is our personal definition of something, and denotative is how it is defined in the dictionary. So I might have a personal definition of what a mother is supposed to be or what a father is supposed to be, but it might look different from the definition in the dictionary. And then the last thing, our language is structured by rules. We have grammar, we have punctuation, we have the rules of communication. So it's very easy for us to kind of just follow those rules from time to time. That's why we have English. That's why we have communication classes in general. All right, the semantic triangle. So we kind of talked about this without really talking about it. So when I asked you guys like last week I should say, to imagine swimming, and I asked you if you imagine them swimming in a pool or if you imagine them swimming in a lake or a river, you were doing what was called the semantic triangle. Every word that we know, we tie to a physical object or a physical concept. So if I say the word cat, for example, on the slide right here, that's going to go from the word. Nope. There we go. We're going to go from the word to your brain, associating it to the picture. Okay? Sometimes the word might go straight to the picture, but it doesn't because your brain is in charge of everything. I don't know if you guys have picked up on that through this class, but your brain is literally controlling everything about you. Your bodily functions and your thoughts as well. So we have a semantic triangle for every single word and every concept that we know. But Mr. Smith, does this mean that we all have the same semantic triangle for every single thing? No, because remember that perception is your own experiences and how you view the world, and everyone has a different perception. So that must mean that everyone has a different semantic triangle for everyone, which makes communication very difficult because what you might think you know is not what that other person might know. So you want to think about that anytime that you're talking. That's why people get into arguments, because we all have different semantic triangles. We all have different semantic triangles for what decency looks like and what safety looks like and what protection looks like. So it's very, very easy for a lot of people to get wrapped up in their own personal definitions of things, but not think about the other person. That's where empathic listening comes into play. Okay, let's clear these drawings. Nonverbal characteristics. An example of nonverbal, me waving, right? It could be ambiguous. Not all gestures are the same for everyone. I might be waving at you and you might think that that's fine, but some people are like, oh no, well, like in my house, my parents would like wave to me whenever they were leaving for school or whenever I was leaving for school, and it made me really anxious. So please, Mr. Smith, never wave at me because it makes me anxious. Absolutely, right? So not all gestures are the same for everyone. That's what ambiguity is. It's not one thing or another. It can be a bunch of numerous things. Excuse me. Nonverbal communication is also continuous. So think back to the transaction model. We think about communicating when we're not communicating, and we think about either past conversations that we've had or conversations that we're going to have in the future. So that means, in theory, that also applies to any nonverbal communication as well. So any gestures, any way that like someone looks at you or gestures at you, you're going to feel some type of way about it maybe later. So nonverbal communication, just like regular communication or verbal communication, is continuous. It can be unplanned or unconscious, and it can be learned and intentional, just like verbal communication. So the uses for nonverbal communication, there's a couple of reasons to do this. Complementing verbal communication. So when you talk with your hands like this, just kidding. Um, but when you do, you're complementing your verbal communication. Okay. Substituting for verbal communication, Mr. Smith, I understand. Thank you for teaching me this. Instead of saying that those two weird pseudo robotic sentences, you could say, easy enough, right? So it substitutes for verbal communication. You can also use it to repeat verbal communication. So like, oh, you just said that. So really quickly, we're gonna take bikini bottom and push it somewhere else. I got you. I got you. And then the last thing is we're going to contradict verbal communication. So something that you might be saying, but your body language is not measuring it up, or it's not measured like at the same level. So maybe you're lying, or your body can't lie, but your words can, right? So if you're lying, but you're like trying to hold it in, your body might be contradicting or going against what you're saying. So that's what that means by contradiction. But either way, the main takeaways that I want you guys to pull from today's notes are nonverbal communication. It's just the same as verbal communication, just without any language, whether written or oral. There's a difference between vocal and non-vocal, and verbal and nonverbal. Much like verbal communication, it can be ambiguous, continuous, unplanned and unconscious, and learned and intentional. We all have a different semantic triangle, so think about that whenever you are communicating or arguing with someone. And the 5 different types of listening. Those are going to be the main takeaways. Listening to sort things out, listening for fun, listening to understand something, listening to make a decision, and then listening with empathy. So that's going to cover our notes for today. We have one more day of notes, so we will get into that tomorrow.